Before every NBA season, anybody with any level of interest in the sport gives their predictions on how they believe the season will go down. Whether they be analysts, fans on social media, or anyone in between, the concept of making predictions sets the tone for how they expect this year to go down for each team, and you can usually get a general sense of how good of a team might be from these expectations beforehand. This offseason was incredibly eventful for a number of reasons, as a lot of the proceedings were pretty hectic due to the shortness of the break between seasons. There was non-stop action going on from the draft to free agency to training camp and then to the start of the season back to back to back to back, and a lot of the transactions made were very big deals, with one of the biggest ones being the John Wall for Russell Westbrook trade that went down between Washington and Houston. This trade was seen by most as a win for the Wizards. The expectation was that they would be a viable playoff competitor that would make some noise this season, and overall, the reception was pretty positive. But we're now 10 games into the season, and already things seem to be crumbling for them, which brings us to the topic of today's video. Today, we'll be discussing everything wrong with the Washington Wizards, what areas they need to address, and whether or not this season is salvageable. Before we start though, it turns out about 67% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now, with that being said, let's begin. Last year, the Wizards were a bad team that overperformed because Bradley Beal has emerged into a top-tier player, and he did everything he could to carry them. He was the second leading scorer in the entire NBA last year, putting up 30.5 points per game. He embraced more of a playmaking role as well, averaging a career-high 6 assists per game, and they finished 9th place in the East before the stoppage of play because of COVID. This offseason, the goal was to get him the help he needs to get the team back on track into the playoffs, and originally, the idea was that with John Wall coming back from his injury, he would be that support, but once the drama unfolded in Houston and Westbrook requested a trade, he ended up getting shipped out in that trade that brought Russell Westbrook to town, and together, they formed, in theory, an incredibly dynamic duo in the backcourt, ready to take the East by storm. The full details of this trade saw the Rockets send Russell Westbrook to the Wizards, and the Wizards gave up John Wall and a protected first-round pick. The protection on that pick starts as lottery protected this year, but every year the protection lightens up further and further, so eventually it will translate to be a first-rounder. The year it converts just depends on how long the Wizards find themselves near the bottom of the standings. This brings us to the start of the current season, and from the very beginning, things started to spiral out of control. The Wizards started off the year on a 5-game losing streak, then they managed to win 2 games in a row, one being against the lowly Timberwolves, and the other coming in an impressive showing against the Nets. Then they followed that up with another 3-game losing streak, and now here we are, as they sit at the very bottom of the NBA standings with the worst record in the league of 2-8. What started as an exciting and promising season with 2 legitimate stars ready to get them back on track has suddenly turned into complete chaos, with turmoil across the board and frustration growing by the day. To be fair, Bradley Beal has held up his end of the bargain, and honestly, you can't help but feel bad for him. Beal is putting up a new career high in scoring this year, so far averaging 35 points per game. He's been highly efficient in doing so, making 49% of his shots and 39% of his threes, despite the fact that he's the guy honed in on by defenses the most, and he's forced to take a ton of difficult shots, and night after night, he seems to catch fire to no avail as the team around him lets games slip away. Like, imagine putting up 60 points in a game and still losing like he did against the Philadelphia 76ers, and then following that game up with a 41-point performance and still losing that game again. So what's the issue? Why are the Wizards struggling so badly? Well, to put it simply, a lot, but the first thing that needs to be mentioned as a source of it all is their pitiful defense, and honestly this is something everyone should have been more concerned with before the year even started. Last season, the Wizards were the second worst defensive team in the entire NBA, ranking 29th overall with a defensive rating of 114.7, meaning they allowed 114.7 points per 100 possessions on defense last year. This year, and I swear I'm not making this up, they literally have the same defensive rating as last year, once again allowing 114.7 points per 100 possessions as a defensive rating. The reason I said we should have seen this coming is because, well, they literally didn't address that side of the floor at all this offseason, and they brought back a very similar team filled with poor defenders. The only real defensive addition they made was bringing in Robin Lopez, who has always been a solid presence in the middle in spurts, but the guy rightfully only plays 15 minutes per game as a backup center, which is what he's always been in his career, and one minor addition like that isn't going to affect a team's overall performance on that end in any capacity. You might be thinking that Russell Westbrook could have helped in this end because he's seen as someone who goes all out all the time on the court, but that's just a narrative that simply needs to die out because especially on the defensive end, that hasn't been the case in years. Westbrook has struggled keeping his man in front of him on defense regularly this season, and off the ball, he makes a lot of questionable decisions trying to make plays creating turnovers, and when those kind of plays don't work out, it results in his man usually being very open for easy shots. After him, the rest of the rotation is just simply made up of bad defenders, and we can't sugarcoat this fact anymore. Davis Bertans is a lights-out shooter, but the guy can't play defense to save his life. Young guys like Rui Hachimura and Deni Avdija are obviously very promising players with potential to become good all-around contributors, but like most young players, they have to learn a lot for the most part and are negatives on defense right now too. Backup guards like Raul Neto and Ish Smith are legitimate liabilities as perimeter defenders. The list goes on, and I think you get my point. Also, I don't want this to sound like I'm picking on Russell Westbrook and blaming him the most, because even though he has had his issues with playing efficiently and smart at times, he has generally made the team better when he's been on the court. For example, in the team's first 3 losses in games that he played in, the team actually did outscore their opponents in the time that he was on the court. This hasn't happened every game, mind you, but it also demonstrates that he hasn't been a total negative like a lot of people would try to make it out to be. But with that being said, he definitely hasn't been playing as well as he's capable of either. He's only shooting 38% from the field and 30% from 3, both well below league average, and he's turning it over more than 5 times per game, which needs to be cut back on. On top of all of this, while you might have been holding out on this just being a slow start with them having time to turn things around, the injury bug has begun to strike once again. It just became known that starting center Thomas Bryant will miss the rest of the season because of a torn ACL, which is a huge loss for them because he brings good energy on the inside and he was playing well alongside Beal and Westbrook. Plus, Westbrook is also now out for a few games because of a quad injury that has been nagging him lately, and he's set to miss some time as well. The Wizards are an explosive offensive team, but they're also an abysmal defensive team, and after everything we just discussed, I don't think they have enough to turn their season around. There is no simple fix here, and big changes might need to happen. Head coach Scott Brooks is very much on the hot seat right now and could end up losing his job before the season ends, and Bradley Beal might request a trade if his frustration continues, and they very well might have to shift their focus towards a rebuild, because right now the makeup of the team is just not built for success no matter how you try to spin it. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think the Wizards need to do to turn things around. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.